One act of courage can change everything. This story will show you how. Where are you listening from? Tell us in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this. He didn't look like anyone you'd notice on a crowded morning, and maybe that's why fate chose him. A tired single dad with calloused hands and a clean-shaven promise to do better than yesterday. Daniel Weber zipped his worn jacket while balancing a lunchbox and a set of keys that never sat right in his pocket. Beside him, Lily hopped from tile to tile, her braids a little uneven because she'd insisted on doing them herself. "Teeth?" he asked. "Sparkly," she said, flashing foam and a grin. The day hummed with the ordinary voices, engines, the clatter of cups, and then that hum bent into something sharp. Metal screamed, the kind of sound that empties a person's chest before they even know why. Daniel's head lifted. Instinct turned down the world like a dimmer switch. He saw the driverless delivery truck sliding fast, wide, impossible to stop. And in its path, moving with the calm certainty of someone who assumes the world will part for her, walked a woman in a pale coat, heels floating over the seam of the crosswalk, eyes on her phone, oblivious. "Stay here, Lil," Daniel said, voice steady in a way that made Lily's small hand fall away without argument. He ran, not like a hero, but like a father, a straight line through chaos. Horns yelped. A bicycle skidded. Paper cups flew. He didn't think about anything except angle and timing. Grab the waist, pivot the weight, roll toward the gutter. He hit her like a tackle that had learned manners at the last second, arms locking around her middle as the truck roared past close enough to comb his hair with wind and grit. The mirror clipped his forearm, hot and bright. Pain flashed, filed, ignored. The truck smashed into a light pole with a booming shudder. Glass rained like hard rain. For a heartbeat, there was only the woman's breath on his collar and the echo of what might have been. "Are you okay?" he asked, releasing her carefully. She stared up at him, eyes ice clear and stunned, like someone who had never been surprised in public. "You saved me." "Lucky angle," he said. And then Lily was there, small arms around his waist, face buried, voice wobbly. "Daddy." He squeezed back, everything in him checking boxes. She's safe, she's breathing, she's here. He turned back to the woman and only then recognized the face from glossy covers and relentless screens. Alexandra Brandt, the one people called too young, too bold, too certain. She stood now with a torn cuff and hair out of place, and something fragile showing where the armor had cracked. A man in a dark coat appeared and spoke her name, Ms. Brandt, but she didn't look away from Daniel. "You're bleeding," she said, noticing the thin red line along his forearm. Daniel glanced at it like it belonged to someone else. "It'll keep." Sirens threaded into the edges of the street. Curious phones lifted. Daniel's muscles tensed the way they do when attention turns into a net. He wanted distance, quiet, a door that closed. "EMTs will check you," he told her. "Shock sneaky." "Wait," she said, catching his sleeve with the gentlest hold, as if she was learning how to ask. "Your name?" "Daniel." He almost kept walking. Then, because truth is a reflex for men who build their days on it, added, "Daniel Weber." She said his name like she was saving it somewhere no one else could reach. Lily peeked around him, wide-eyed. Alexandra crouched to Lily's height, shoes leaving tiny crescents in the dust. "You were very brave to let him run," she said. "He always comes back," Lily answered, like it was a rule she'd written herself. They moved to the curb to let the professionals swarm the wreck, and for a moment the three of them shared a bubble of quiet inside the noise. The coat-free version of the man in the dark suit, security, assistant, handler, who could tell, leaned in to murmur something to Alexandra. She answered without looking away from Daniel. "I'd like to thank you properly," she said. "That's not necessary," he replied. His voice stayed even, but there was steel in it, the kind that doesn't clang. "I didn't do it for a headline." "Neither did I ask for one," she said, the hint of a smile arriving like a secret. "Still," he went on, reaching for Lily's hand, "today is already loud enough." He nodded, half bow, half exit, and began to guide his daughter away from the growing circle of lights and lenses. Alexandra stood, watching him go like a person who'd just heard a melody she would spend the rest of the day trying to remember. A bystander called out, "Hey, hero." Daniel didn't turn. Lily did. "He's my dad," she corrected softly, and that seemed somehow truer than anything the trending feeds would say 10 minutes later. The clip hit the networks before the tow cable even tightened around the truck's torn bumper. Someone had captured the dive, the pivot, the roll the way Daniel's body had fit the problem and solved it in one motion. Commentators said words like instinct and courage and luck. A whisper thread wondered if it was staged, and then it died because real fear doesn't stage well. Alexandra's name rode the top of the feed. Daniel's didn't, because he didn't leave it. He shut off his phone and took Lily for hot cocoa that tasted like relief. When they got back to the shop, he washed the cut with 2 cold water and let Lily put the cartoon bandage on like she was fixing the world. "Does it hurt?" she asked. "Only when I laugh," he said, and she made him laugh anyway. Hours later, when the bay was quiet and the smell of oil had settled into something almost warm, the soft staccato of unfamiliar heels crossed the concrete. He knew the sound of belonging and the sound of visiting. This was the second one. He wiped his hands and turned. Alexandra stood under the fluorescent buzz, not dressed for a boardroom, not dressed for a camera, just dressed like a person who had decided to be nowhere else. "You found me," Daniel said. "You left before I could say thank you," she answered, and those two ideas met in the space between them like magnets arguing about which way is north. Her gaze moved over the orderly chaos of the shop, labeled bins, a wall of wrenches that looked like a language, a battered kettle that had boiled 1,000 small comforts. "Is this yours?" she asked. "It's ours," Daniel said, tipping his head toward the corner where Lily had started a constellation of doodles in a notebook. "We keep things running." "I'm familiar with that job," she said, a quick flash of humor that was gone almost before it landed. He nodded at her hand, where she still held her phone without really holding it. "Your people okay?" "They'll say they are," she replied, which was an answer and not an answer. A breeze sneaked through the half-open door. The world outside kept being loud. Inside, something gentler tried to happen and didn't quite know how. "You risked yourself for me," Alexandra said. "You didn't even know who I was." "You were someone in the way," he said simply. "That's all I needed to know." She watched him like she was cataloging a rare element. "What did you do before this?" Daniel lifted a socket, turned it in his palm, set it down. "Built things that flew. Wrote warnings no one liked. Learned the cost of not being heard." The last sentence sat in the air like a tool nobody wanted to pick up. A distant siren rose and fell. The shop's clock clicked to the next minute. Alexandra took a breath that looked like a decision forming. "Let me take you and Lily to dinner. Somewhere quiet. No cameras." He shook his head. "We're not a project, Ms. Brandt." "Alexandra," she corrected gently. "Alex," Lily tested from the corner, and Alexandra smiled like she'd been given a gift that fit. "We don't need anything," Daniel said. "Maybe you don't," she answered, "but I do. I need to look at the person who changed my day and say more than 2 words on a sidewalk." He studied her posture, trained to be unbreakable, eyes that had just learned to bend. He wanted to say no because no was safe and clean. He also wanted to say yes because yes was human and alive. He opened his mouth to choose, and that was the moment the night remembered it wasn't done. From outside came the hard slap of a second screech, closer this time, meaner, followed by a thud that rattled the toolbox drawers. The sound cut a bright line across the room. Lily's pencil stopped. Daniel was already moving when the lights flickered once, twice, and the edge of the half-lowered bay door juddered down on its own, metal grinding, sparks spitting toward a shelf with an open can of solvent. He lunged for the switch, saw the frayed cord he hadn't seen before, smelled heat where there shouldn't be any. Somewhere beyond the door, a heavy engine revved too high, too wrong, like someone was pushing a machine to break it. Daniel's heart slammed against his ribs as the grinding echoed through the shop. He yanked the emergency lever, forcing the stubborn bay door back up with a screech that left his palms burning. Sparks danced across the floor before fizzling out, but the acrid smell of melted wiring clung to the air. Lily squeaked from her corner, clutching her notebook like a shield. Alexandra had frozen at first, then moved fast toward Lily, pulling her close with surprising steadiness. "What was that?" she demanded, her voice tight but controlled. Daniel's jaw clenched. He scanned the half-lit alley outside, every muscle taut like a spring. An engine idled too long, then cut off. The silence that followed was heavier than the noise. Whoever had floored that gas pedal hadn't stuck around. Not yet. He turned back, crouching to Lily's level. "You okay, Peanut?" She nodded, though her hands shook. It was loud. He brushed her hair back gently, forcing calm into his tone. Just wires throwing a tantrum. Nothing we can't fix. But Alexandra's sharp gaze was on him, reading more than he said. She pointed to the bay door. That wasn't an accident. Daniel hated that she was right. The fray on the cord had been deliberate, not wear and tear. Someone had set it to fail. He wiped his hands down his jacket, grounding himself. Could be kids messing around, he offered, though he didn't believe it. Alexandra's voice softened, but it cut deeper for it. Or maybe someone doesn't like that you saved me in front of a dozen cameras. Daniel didn't answer. He didn't need to. The next day, life pretended to be normal. Daniel worked beneath the hood of a rust-bitten sedan, his mind replaying the sound of that revving engine on a loop. Lily sat cross-legged on a stool, sketching rockets and scribbling numbers the way she always did. But even she glanced nervously at the door when it rattled with each passing truck. And then, just before noon, Alexandra arrived again, this time not in silk or guarded by bodyguards, but in jeans, sneakers, and a jacket zipped to her chin. She carried 2 paper bags that smelled faintly of burgers and fries. "Lunch," she announced, as if it were the most ordinary thing in the world. Daniel raised an eyebrow from beneath the hood. "That's a dangerous habit you're starting." She smirked. "What? Showing up where I'm not invited?" He gave her a look that wasn't quite a smile. "Exactly that." Still, he wiped his hands and accepted the bag she held out. They sat together on overturned crates, the grease and dust of the garage contrasting with the shine that clung to Alexandra even when she dressed down. Lily happily dug into her fries, humming between bites. Alexandra watched Daniel eat like she was studying him, not just the way he chewed, but the quiet around him, the way he seemed to fold into silence instead of rushing to fill it. "You don't like attention, do you?" she asked finally. "Never did," he said. "But it's too late for that now." She tilted her head. "Why too late?" Daniel's eyes flicked to the corner where the cord had frayed. "Because somebody out there thinks I should have minded my own business." Alexandra leaned in, her voice low. "Then we're in this together. If they're angry at both of us now." Her words hit him harder than he expected, but he covered it with a sip of soda that didn't quite hide the way his throat tightened. That night, long after Lily had fallen asleep on the couch with ketchup on her chin, Daniel stepped outside to lock the shop. The street stretched quiet, shadows bending unnaturally long beneath the flickering street lamp. His gut told him he wasn't alone. He paused, keys in hand, ears straining. Somewhere in the dark, a lighter clicked, then flared, revealing the faint silhouette of a man leaning against a wall. The flame died, leaving only smoke curling into the cool air. "Mr. Weber," a voice called softly, too calm, too sure. Daniel's pulse spiked, but he didn't move. The man didn't step forward. He just let the words hang there like bait. Heroes don't last long when they step on the wrong toes. Then the sound of boots retreating faded into silence. Daniel exhaled, every nerve screaming. Whoever they were, they'd just made one thing clear: saving Alexandra Brandt had pulled him into a storm that wasn't going to pass quietly. Daniel barely slept that night. Every creak of the old house sounded like a footstep, every passing car like the engine that had revved outside the garage. He sat at the small kitchen table long after Lily drifted off, staring at the chipped mug in his hands as if it held answers. By dawn, he was already back at the shop, checking locks, rewiring the bay door, and pulling every fuse box apart until he was sure no one had tampered again. But the unease stayed, like oil that clings no matter how much you scrub. When Alexandra arrived mid-morning, she didn't look like the polished face on magazine covers. She looked sharper, tired around the eyes, but dangerous in a way Daniel hadn't seen before. She set a folder on the workbench without a word. He frowned, wiping grease from his hands before opening it. Inside were printouts, stills from security footage, and a name scrawled across the top. "Marcus Hahn," she said. "Private contractor. Notorious for doing the dirty work corporations don't want traced back to them." Daniel's jaw tightened as he flipped through the pages. The grainy stills showed the same silhouette he'd seen outside, cigarette ember glowing. Stance relaxed like he owned the street. "Why would he care about me?" Daniel asked, though he already knew the answer. Alexandra folded her arms. "Because you embarrassed them. You saved me in public, and now the world thinks of you as a symbol. Symbols scare men like him." Daniel closed the folder with a snap. "I didn't ask to be one." "Neither did I," she replied, her voice suddenly softer. Their eyes locked, both knowing that refusing the role didn't erase it. Outside, a car door slammed, making Lily jump. Daniel's protective instincts flared so hard, he nearly knocked the chair over getting to the window. It was only a delivery truck, harmless, but his pulse kept hammering. By evening, Daniel had made his decision. He called a friend he hadn't spoken to in years, a fellow veteran who now worked as a mechanic in another town. The call was short, clipped, and ended with the kind of silence men share when they've said enough. Alexandra watched him from across the garage, arms folded, knowing he'd just reopened a door he'd tried to weld shut. "You were military," she said quietly. It wasn't a question. Daniel didn't deny it. "I walked away from that life. Didn't want Lily growing up with shadows I couldn't explain." Alexandra stepped closer. "And now those shadows are walking toward you anyway. So what are you going to do?" He didn't answer, just bent to scoop Lily up from her stool as she rubbed tired eyes. "I'm going to keep her safe, whatever it takes." The next day brought no attacks, no strangers lurking, just quiet that felt too deliberate, like the eye of a storm. Alexandra insisted on driving Daniel and Lily to school and work, her tinted car drawing stairs the way fire draws moths. Lily loved it, grinning at the buttons and soft leather, while Daniel sat stiff, uncomfortable in the luxury. "You don't blend in driving this," he muttered. "Good," Alexandra said. "Let them see me. Visibility makes you a target." She smiled without humor. "I've been a target for years. At least this time, I'm not standing alone." Daniel looked at her, wanting to argue, but the conviction in her voice silenced him. Still, his gut twisted. He wasn't sure if she understood how far people like Han would go when cornered. He'd seen it before when greed and pride were threatened. They didn't fight clean. That night, after tucking Lily into bed, Daniel stepped onto the porch. The air was cool, the street too still. He felt it before he saw it, the prickle along the back of his neck, the certainty of being watched. Then headlights snapped on across the street, flooding him in harsh white. The engine purred low, deliberate. A window slid down, and for a second he caught the glint of eyes in the dark, watching. No words this time, no warning, just the car pulling away slow, taunting, as if to say, "We know where you live. We know who matters to you." Daniel's fists clenched at his sides, his breath sharp in the cold air. Inside, Lily stirred in her sleep, murmuring his name. And in that moment, Daniel realized he wasn't fighting to protect himself anymore. Whoever these people were, they were willing to cross lines he couldn't ignore, and if he didn't move first, they'd come straight for the only two people he couldn't afford to lose. Daniel woke before dawn, every nerve wired tight, as if his body knew danger was already waiting outside. He packed Lily's lunch with hands steadier than he felt, kissed her forehead as she slept, and slipped into the garage while the world was still dark. He needed the quiet, the scent of grease and iron, to think. Alexandra arrived just as the sun broke through the clouds, her car sliding into the gravel with quiet precision. She stepped out carrying 2 thermoses of coffee, looking more like an ally than a billionaire. "You didn't sleep," she said, reading the exhaustion in his face. Daniel took the thermos without comment. "Neither did you." She leaned against the workbench, watching him. "We can't keep waiting for them to make the next move. We have to know what they want." He set the coffee down, wiped his hands, and finally admitted what had been clawing at him. "They want me to disappear. They want you quiet. And they'll use fear until we bend." Alexandra's expression hardened. "Then we don't bend." Later that morning, Daniel walked Lily to school, every step shadowed by the memory of headlights lingering outside his house. He crouched in front of her at the gate, straightening her backpack straps with extra care. "Stay close to your teacher today," he told her, his voice calm but firm. Lily tilted her head. "Because of the car?" Daniel froze, then nodded slowly. She was sharper than her years. "Don't worry, Daddy," she whispered. "I know you'll keep me safe." He hugged her tighter than usual before letting her go. Watching her vanish into the building felt like peeling off a piece of his soul. When he turned, Alexandra was there across the street, leaning casually against her car, but her eyes scanning the crowd like a hawk. He crossed to her, muttering, "You don't have to be everywhere." "Yes, I do," she said, and for once he didn't argue. That afternoon, the tension finally cracked. Daniel was back at the garage when the low growl of an engine cut through the air. He glanced up just as a black SUV slowed in front of the open bay. The tinted window rolled down, and for a split second, He saw the smirk of Marcus Hahn behind a trail of cigarette smoke. No words, no threats, just a small metal object tossed from the window, clattering across the concrete. The SUV roared off before Daniel could react. He bent slowly, staring at the object, a crushed toy airplane, wings snapped clean off. His blood ran cold. Alexandra, who had just walked in, froze at the sight. "They know about the crash," she whispered. Daniel's jaw flexed. "And they're telling me to keep quiet or watch everything I love break the same way." He hurled the toy into the scrap bin, metal clanging like thunder. "Not this time," he growled. That night, Daniel and Alexandra met in a quiet corner booth of a diner, Lily sitting between them drawing rockets on a napkin. The air was heavy, not with smoke or danger, but with decisions that couldn't be postponed. Alexandra slid a manila envelope across the table. Inside were documents, internal reports, whistleblower memos, files she'd risked her career to uncover. "This is the proof," she said softly. "The crash wasn't just negligence. It was buried on purpose. And the man who signed off on it is still cashing checks." Daniel's hands trembled as he read the familiar names, the same ones that had haunted his nights for years. Lily looked up innocently. "Is it about Mommy's plane?" Daniel's throat closed, pain flashing raw in his eyes. Alexandra reached across the table, covering his hand with hers. "You don't have to carry this alone anymore," she said. And for the first time, Daniel let someone else hold a piece of his burden. When they left the diner, the night air was thick, the streets too quiet. Daniel guided Lily into Alexandra's car, buckling her in carefully, while Alexandra kept watch. As he shut the door, his gut screamed. Across the street, two figures leaned against a lamppost, too still, too deliberate. One of them lit a cigarette, the flame illuminating Hahn's grin. Alexandra tensed. "They're not even hiding anymore." Daniel stepped forward, rage simmering just beneath his skin. "Good. I'm done hiding too." He slid into the driver's seat, gripping the wheel like a weapon. As he pulled away, Hahn tapped two fingers to his temple in a mocking salute. The message was clear. This was war now, and it wouldn't end with threats tossed in the dark. Daniel drove in silence, the hum of the engine the only sound between them. Lily dozed in the back seat, her head tilted against the window, the napkin with her rocket doodles still clutched in her hand. Alexandra sat rigid, every turn of her head scanning the mirrors for shadows that weren't supposed to be there. "They're tightening the noose," she whispered. Daniel's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. "Then we don't give them time to pull it. We hit back first." Alexandra glanced at him sharply. "With what?" He exhaled through his nose, jaw set. "The truth. The files you gave me. My notes. The reports they buried. We drag it all into the light before they can silence us." She hesitated, weighing his words like glass in her palms. "That could destroy me." Daniel's eyes flicked to hers. "Or it could free you." For a moment, the only sound was Lily's soft breathing, then Alexandra leaned back, resolve settling like armor. "Then let's burn their house of cards down." The next day, Daniel walked into the garage with a determination that felt heavier than any wrench he'd ever lifted. He spread blueprints, reports, and technical schematics across the workbench. The mess of his past finally dragged into daylight. Alexandra joined him, sleeves rolled up, looking less like a CEO and more like a soldier gearing up for battle. "If we're going to do this," she said, "we need allies. People who can't be bought." Daniel nodded. "Engineers, regulators, families who lost everything when that plane went down." He tapped the corner of one document, the ink smudged from years of handling. "They'll try to call me a liar, but the numbers don't lie, and neither do the graves." Alexandra's gaze lingered on him. "You've carried this weight alone long enough." He gave a tired half-smile. "Then maybe it's time to drop it on their doorstep." That night, Daniel tucked Lily into bed, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. "Daddy," she murmured sleepily, "will Mommy be proud of you?" The question speared straight through him. He swallowed hard, voice rough. "I hope so, Peanut." Her small hand curled around his wrist, and within seconds she was asleep, leaving him with the echo of her innocence. When he stepped back into the living room, Alexandra was waiting, leaning against the doorway with an expression caught between admiration and worry. "You don't have to fight this war," she said softly. Daniel shook his head. "I don't have a choice. They came to my home. They threatened my daughter. I can't let that stand." Alexandra's eyes softened. "Then we'll fight it together." The following morning, the war began in earnest. Alexandra summoned a closed-door meeting with independent engineers and a compliance officer she trusted. Daniel walked into the room carrying only a folder and the truth. He laid out the memos, the suppressed test data, the warnings ignored. His voice didn't shake. Every line he spoke was a nail in the coffin of the cover-up. One engineer, skeptical at first, leaned forward, scanning the reports. This is undeniable, he muttered. The compliance officer nodded gravely. If this goes public, it will shatter more than reputations. Entire corporations could collapse. Daniel looked him dead in the eye, then let them collapse. People died, including my wife. The room fell silent, the weight of his words settling over them like ash. Alexandra placed a hand on his shoulder, grounding him. This isn't just his fight anymore, she said firmly. It's ours. But as they left the meeting, stepping into the glass atrium of the tower, Daniel's gut clenched. Parked across the street was the same black SUV, windows tinted, engine idling. Han leaned forward just enough for his face to catch the light. This time, he wasn't smiling. He lifted his phone slowly, deliberately, and tapped the screen. Daniel's own phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out and froze. A photo filled the screen. Lily, snapped from outside her school gate that morning. His vision tunneled, rage boiling hot in his chest. Alexandra saw it too, her face blanching. Han raised 2 fingers again, but this time the gesture wasn't mocking, it was a promise. Daniel shoved the phone into his pocket, his voice low and deadly. They just crossed the line. Daniel's pulse hammered as he stared at the photo on his phone. His daughter's smile, innocent and unaware, framed by the schoolyard gate. It wasn't just a threat anymore. It was a declaration of war. He stormed into the garage that night, slamming the door so hard the tools rattled against the wall. Alexandra followed close behind, calm on the outside, but her hands clenched white at her sides. They're watching her, Daniel. They want to break you. He leaned hard against the workbench, breathing like he'd run miles. They won't touch her, he said through gritted teeth. Because if they do, I'll tear down everything they've built, brick by brick. Alexandra stepped closer, lowering her voice. Then let's not wait for them to strike. Let's hit first. The following day was a blur of preparation. Alexandra worked her contacts, calling in favors from journalists and whistleblowers who still had a conscience. Daniel pored over the technical data again, highlighting every memo, every ignored warning, every manipulation that had led to the crash. He spoke quietly with Lily that night, holding her hand as she listened intently. Daddy's got to tell some people the truth, he explained gently. Some very bad men don't want me to, but I need you to be brave. Lily blinked up at him, too wise for her age. Like you were brave for Mommy. His throat tightened. He nodded. Exactly like that. She squeezed his hand. Then I'll be brave too. Those words gave him more strength than any weapon could. The next morning, Alexandra and Daniel walked side by side into a conference room filled with independent regulators, ethicists, and reporters who had been secretly invited. No board members, no shareholders, just truth seekers. Daniel set the folder on the table, his calloused hands steady now. 8 years ago, I filed reports about a flaw in the Vega program, he began. His voice carried no theatrics, only weight. They buried them. The plane went down. My wife was on it. So were 31 other souls. And the men responsible still sit in corner offices. Gasps rippled through the room as Alexandra projected the signed memo onto a screen, the damning words in black and white. One regulator leaned forward, eyes wide. This is enough to reopen the case immediately. Daniel nodded. Then do it. Because I won't bury the truth with them. The fallout was immediate. News outlets exploded within hours, headlines screaming of conspiracy and cover-up. Stock prices trembled, boardrooms panicked, and the once untouchable Carson Blakethue executive who'd buried Daniel's warnings was suddenly plastered across every screen. Alexandra stood on live television beside Daniel, her voice sharp as steel. We don't serve profits. We serve people. And no one is above accountability. For the first time, Daniel wasn't invisible. He wasn't a forgotten mechanic fixing engines in a quiet garage. He was the man who refused to stay silent, and the world was finally listening. But victory came with a cost. That night, as they left the studio, Daniel's phone buzzed again. Another photo, not Lily this time but Alexandra, snapped through the window of her own penthouse. Han was still out there, and now he wanted them both to know it. Daniel's fury burned cold. He stood on the rooftop of the garage, staring out into the night as Alexandra joined him. "They're not backing down," she said, her voice steady despite the storm around them. "Neither am I," he replied. She looked at him, really looked, and for the first time saw the man beneath the scars, the father, the fighter, the survivor who had nothing left to lose but everything to protect. "You don't have to face this alone anymore," she whispered. He turned to her, the anger in his chest tempered by something warmer. "Maybe I don't want to," he admitted. Their eyes locked, the city roaring beneath them, and in that fragile moment they both understood. This wasn't just about revenge or truth anymore. It was about building something worth fighting for, even if it meant standing at the edge of a storm that promised to swallow them whole. Daniel didn't wait for dawn this time. He rose before the city stirred, the decision already carved into his chest like steel. He strapped his old watch onto his wrist, the one his wife had given him years ago, and glanced toward the couch, where Lily slept curled in a blanket, safe for the moment. Alexandra stood near the window, her hair pulled back, a phone buzzing with non-stop calls she ignored. When he looked at her, she nodded as if she already knew his mind. "It ends today," she said quietly. He answered with the kind of look only a man who has already burned his bridges can give. "Then let's finish it." Together, they gathered the final stack of evidence, the recordings, the photos, the signed reports Han had tried to bury, and headed out into the teeth of the storm. By noon, the press was everywhere. Reporters swarmed outside Monroe Tower, cameras flashing like lightning, demanding answers. Alexandra strode up the steps with Daniel at her side, their presence alone commanding silence. She raised her hand, steady as marble, and began. 8 years ago, 32 lives were stolen by greed and arrogance. Today, we reclaim their voices. She passed the microphone to Daniel, and for a moment he just stood there, eyes scanning the crowd, searching for the courage to speak. Then he did. "My wife was one of them. She died because men like Carson Blake decided profit mattered more than safety. They silenced me once. They won't again." Gasps rippled through the reporters. He held up the damning memo, cameras snapping furiously. "This is the truth they tried to erase. And if I disappear tomorrow, you all know why." The silence broke into a frenzy, but above it all Daniel heard Lily's voice in his memory. "Be brave, Daddy." That night, Han finally made his move. Daniel had just finished locking the garage when the black SUV pulled up, headlights cutting through the dark. Han stepped out, cigarette dangling, smirk twisted into something feral. "You should have walked away," he said. Daniel didn't flinch. "So should you." The two men squared off in the flickering light, oil and smoke heavy in the air. Han lunged first, a flash of metal in his hand, but Daniel caught his wrist, years of buried training roaring back to life. They crashed against the hood of a car, metal groaning under their weight. Han swung wild. Daniel blocked, every strike fueled by the memory of Lily's smile and his wife's absence. Alexandra appeared in the doorway, shouting his name, but Daniel's focus was absolute. He twisted Han's arm, the knife clattering to the ground, and pinned him with a strength born not of rage, but of resolve. "This ends here," Daniel growled. Sirens wailed in the distance. For the first time, Han looked afraid. The police dragged Han away minutes later, his threats echoing uselessly into the night. Daniel stood breathing hard, blood on his lip, but unbroken. Alexandra touched his arm gently. "You didn't have to fight him alone." He turned to her, eyes still blazing. "I wasn't alone." She smiled, the kind of smile that carried weight and promise. Behind them, Lily peeked out from the office, clutching her sketchbook, wide-eyed but safe. Daniel crouched and pulled her into his arms. "It's over, Peanut," he whispered. She pressed her face into his chest. "You didn't run away." He kissed the top of her head. "Not this time." Alexandra watched them, her own eyes glistening, and in that fragile moment, the three of them felt less like survivors and more like something new, a family forged in fire. Months passed. The investigation swallowed headlines, indictments rolling out against Blake and his co-conspirators. Monroe media, battered but unbroken, rose from the scandal with a new face, Alexandra and Daniel together, announcing the creation of the Brant Weber Initiative, a training program for young engineers, mechanics, and dreamers who deserved a chance. The garage became its first classroom, its walls echoing with laughter and ambition instead of fear. Daniel taught with grease on his hands and light in his eyes, while Alexandra rebuilt her empire with a clarity she'd never known before. And Lily Bright, fearless Lily, ran through it all with drawings and questions, the beating heart of their second chance. On a quiet evening, the three of them sat on the hood of Daniel's old truck, watching the stars scatter like sparks across the sky. "Do you still think you don't belong in my world?" Alexandra asked softly. Daniel shook his head, sliding an arm around her shoulders. "No," he said. "I think we built a new one." Lily giggled, pointing at a shooting star. "Make a wish." Daniel looked at Alexandra, at the life they'd carved from loss and defiance, and smiled. "Already did." The night wrapped around them warm and steady, and for the first time in years, Daniel Weber believed in tomorrow not because it was promised, but because it was theirs.